Good afternoon and welcome to today's Adweek webinar, where we'll be answering that question that's probably on the mind of every marketer today, and that is, has shopping been upended forever? And really helping everyone understand all the pandemic habits and pandemic consumer behaviors, which of those are going to stick around, which of those are going to disappear. And our webinar today is being sponsored by InMobi. I'm Stuart File, Vice President of Branded Content at Adweek, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. Before we begin, I'd just like to take a few minutes, make sure that everyone knows what to expect from our webinar today and is also familiar with the various features of our webinar platform. Our presentation should go somewhere in the 35 to 40-minute range. Afterwards, we're going to have plenty of time for audience Q&A, and we know that this is a topic where we frequently get a lot of questions. So if at any point during the presentation, if you have a question for our speakers, just use the question tool that you should see there showing up underneath the video window for today's webinar. Submit your questions. We're going to get to as many as we can in the 10 minutes or so we have following our live presentation. So love to have those queued up well ahead of time. So when you have a question, just ask it. It's not too late, by the way, to invite your colleagues to come and join us today. And we'd really love it if they would. About 15 minutes ago, we sent everyone a final reminder email on today's webinar. In there, you'll find a link to the registration page. So grab that link, send it off to your colleagues. They still have plenty of time to register. Come on in and join us live. But if they can't make it live, today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand. And we're going to send a link to that on-demand version to all of our registered users, about 3:30 Eastern time today. So keep an eye out for that. If you have to leave early, you can always come back and check out the recording. If you'd like to get a copy of the slides today, and yes, we will have slides. While it's a video event, it is a combination of a slide presentation from our sponsors at Mobi, and then a conversation with our guest speaker from Dentsu. If you want the slides, you will find them in the event resources area. You should see that tab down there where you see the question tool. At any point, you can go on in there and get a PDF of our slide presentation today. Lastly, I just want to take a moment here and remind everyone to please check out the Adweek webinar calendar, www.adweek.com/webinars. This is the first of 4 webinars we are hosting this week. Lots of different topics. I urge you to check out the others this week. They're all really interesting. Really, we're covering everything that anyone involved in any sort of brand marketing ecosystem, both from the advertiser, agency, the brand point of view, the publisher point of view, lots of different topics. See what's coming up. Sign up for an upcoming webinar. Check out our full archive of on-demand webinars as well. That's every webinar that we've done over the past 12 months. So let me move on to today's webinar, and I just want to take a second here before we get going and introduce you to our speakers. From our sponsors at InMobi, we're very happy to be joined by Justin Sparks, who's the head of vertical strategy for North America. At InMobi, where he focuses on building vertical-specific partnerships and solutions in the mobile ad tech space for advertisers. Also from InMobi, we're joined by Jeremy Huber. Jeremy's the head of audience intelligence at InMobi, as we're going to be going through some research that they've conducted. And of course, he oversees their consumer insights, market research, and audiences solutions, working with partners to understand and identify consumers for media activation and acquisition. And our guest for the conversation part today is Jackie Mockridge-Matina. Jackie's the head of audiences and insights over at Dentsu Media US, where she oversees audience intelligence for that full service line that's really comprised of 40 research experts, data investigators, and storytellers. Storytellers always important in all of this. And Jackie helps empower brands to make more informed, impactful, empathetic, and effective media decisions, all, of course, around the data that is driving those decisions. So Let's move on to the next portion here, and let me bring up Jeremy and Justin rather quickly to start our webinar today. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks, Stuart. Happy to be here. Great. So as Stuart mentioned, we will go through 3 sections today, one being the research that Jeremy and our team at InMobi have conducted over the last year as we saw different trends across not only retail, but some other categories. Second being how consumers plan to shop over the next 6 to 9 months as vaccinations roll out and in-store shopping comes back. And then lastly, we'll cover with Jackie in a fireside chat format how retailers and consumer brands should be thinking about their marketing and their advertising strategies going into the second half of the year and what they should be doing to execute effectively. And then lastly, as Stuart mentioned, we'll end the hour with a Q&A with Jeremy, Jackie, and myself for the last 10 to 15 minutes. So as you guys see the content and the conversation today, please, as Stuart mentioned, put in your questions in the chat box and we'll be sure to surface them. But with that in mind, thank you all for joining us. And Jeremy, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Justin. Before we dive into the answers to those questions around, how consumer habits changed and how consumers plan to shop, we're going to take just a few minutes to talk about where we get those types of answers, and that always comes back to our data. So I'll spend a few minutes just sharing with those that may not be familiar with InMobi and our data lake here in North America, where all that's coming from and how our data lake is comprised. So we actually, like maybe some, have 2 different types of data at InMobi. We have the observed side, a ton of data signals where we observe consumers, both digital and physical behaviors as they engage with brands. We also have declared data through our market research platform to answer some of the why questions. On that declared side, the 3 sources that are up on your screen here, they're really comprised of 3 different areas. The first is that we have first-party mobile data, and for that we have over 10 million daily active users. We see a pretty deep view of what's happening on those devices, not just every app that's installed and uninstalled. We also have some persistent location signals, in addition to some Experian verified demographics that we attach to those records to really understand not just who's installing or uninstalling apps, but really, more about them, right? Demographically and behaviorally. In addition to that first party, we have a very large set of app SDK data. So InMobi, in our ability to serve up media effectively within those publisher partnerships, we receive data back, which is good for our team to use, as it includes a lot of app usage and device information, additional demographics, additional location signals, things of that nature. So beyond those 2, we also have, millions of commercial polygons. We have over 100 million residential polygons that allows us to look at consumers and their behaviors from home to retailers and back, and where they visit. We also source additional purchase behavior to fill in some of the gaps as to what people are buying if we don't already have visibility. In addition to that, we have web browsing and additional demographic data that we source from additional partners. So that really rounds out the observed side of our data lake. And then when we start to leverage Pulse, we use that for that declared or stated data side. InMobi Pulse is an InMobi platform that we built for market research. And so, of course, we offer very typical market research solutions, whether it be ad effectiveness, brand tracking, concept testing. But in addition to that, we're able to use it for our data lake and enhancing our understanding of consumers, right? So because we have unique identifiers and we can target users by that, we're able to ask them deeper questions around maybe what products they purchased in the past, what they intend to purchase, any barriers they may have to purchasing from specific brands, et cetera. So we're getting those signals in. We also offer that service to our partners, right? So retail and CPG partners specifically are very aligned with that solution in which they have their own data lake, maybe some sort of a CDP. They have a unique identifier attached to their consumers. We're able to survey their consumers or their prospects, ask them similar types of questions to get that data back. So again, that's the entirety of our data lake observed and declared. We combine all that together to allow us to provide meaningful insights to our partners, whether it be brands or agencies. We provide both the digital and the physical view of consumers. And here at InMobi, in most cases, we use those insights to inform our InMobi audiences for media activation. However, today, the conversation is more around understanding how we're leveraging that data to answer a couple of key questions, not necessarily audiences. And the first question that Justin asked us, of course, is how did consumer habits change during the pandemic? And maybe a better question might be how didn't they change, right? Because our lives were all affected at just about every degree during the pandemic. It was new to, most everybody here in North America and around the globe. But more specifically, consumers, myself included, of course, and most people on this call, had to change how we ate and shopped for food. We also had to adapt in how we're shopping for goods, right? Stores were closed, and so you were having to resort to different avenues and channels for that. How do we find entertainment? Again, in a shelter-in-place type of environment. We're going to talk about those three. In addition to that, how did consumers, how did people manage their physical and mental health? Although we're not going to touch deep on this, many people on this call probably can reflect back. We were watching the Peloton app for physical health. We were watching the Peloton app engagement, grow rapidly during the pandemic as gyms were closed. Similarly, we were watching many telehealth apps have a higher level of engagement adoption because people were looking for contactless channels to maintain their mental health. How people worked and educated their children changed immediately, right? There were countless articles on Zoom and the success of Zoom. We were watching in real time as Zoom hit levels of engagement and growth that I don't know that we've seen any brand hit at any point, regardless of a pandemic. So how we were working through video conferencing, we had to adapt. Many parents became teachers or teachers' aides during the pandemic as schools were closed, and they had to be sure that their children were still learning. All of those behaviors, and we're going to focus on the top three in today's call because it's a little more retail-centric for this webinar, they all had something in common, and that's that more and more people turn to their devices, right? I mean, when you think about it, you're physically in your house or sheltering in place. How are you able to shop for food and buy products and entertain and everything else? An interesting stat we found from eMarketer's Insider Intelligence was that they found that during the pandemic, users increased their time spent with devices, their mobile devices, by 31 minutes. When you think about it, 31 minutes may not sound like a lot, but I think their stat going into it was about 3.5 hours a day people were engaging with mobile devices. So let's say you're one of the lucky ones and you're getting 8 hours of sleep. You've got 16 hours left in the day, and based off this new stat, about 4 hours and 15 minutes of your time is spent on your mobile device. So over 25% of your time, or average consumer's time within a day, is spent on their mobile devices. This was a trend that we were observing pre-pandemic, but it is certainly something that the pandemic helped to accelerate rapidly. And I think many of us probably experienced that ourselves. So again, we're going to focus on the top three areas in which consumer habits changed during the pandemic, and we will dive right into the first. And before I start throwing some stats your way, I'll share that, again, throughout the pandemic, beginning and even today, we did multiple waves of market research through Pulse to understand how consumers were adapting, as well as doing and leveraging those observed data signals I mentioned before. So I'm going to share a view from both sides of it as we go through a couple of these key categories. So one of our waves of market research from March and April of last year, we knew people were adapting and they were evolving, but we asked them, how many of you changed your grocery buying behavior since the pandemic began? And again, 68% affirmed that they have been changing their behavior. Now, that's probably not a surprise to most because it was so deeply impactful in so many ways. So then we start to go a little click deeper. So again, these are these observed data signals that we see for app install and app engagement. And what was interesting here that we'd like to call out in that black box is a bit of an inflection point for a couple of brands. Pre-pandemic, Target, by the way, if you haven't ever used a Target app for buy online and curbside pickup, they do an incredible job. It's one of the most seamless user experiences I personally tried out. So it's no surprise to me and us that they had a very strong adoption rate pre-pandemic. But what's interesting here is once you see that second week of March, where panic buying was in full effect, people were looking at different ways in which they could purchase their groceries. Two brands in particular started to see exponential growth beyond what just Target was seeing, and that was Instacart and Walmart. Okay, Instacart has since leveled off because grocery stores started to open more, the shorter lines. Many grocers and retailers were taking into account COVID precautions, but Walmart still going very strong, and Target as well, very strong. So those behaviors where people started to, maybe they were a little slower to, adopt app-based purchasing and curbside pickup, definitely still seeing some accelerated usage even post-pandemic. Another category as it relates to people eating food that I want to touch on, because again, it's just very interesting from our perspective. When you think about the transit, kind of the transition of what was happening throughout the pandemic early on, people were buying groceries, and I'll speak for myself. We were wiping them down and disinfecting before you bring it into the house because you weren't quite sure, experts weren't quite sure how the virus was spread or how it wasn't spread. Not long after, the experts had advised us all that it was highly, highly unlikely that you could contract COVID by touching packages or consuming prepared meals. And so, yes, we saw that rapid increase on buy online and curbside pickup, but we started to see just a little bit past that, and you'll see here within this box, kind of mid-late March, early April, is some brands started to realize that there was going to be a larger need for consumers doing curbside or drive-through and ordering ahead. So in this example, we wanted to highlight what we saw with Burger King. So McDonald's is no stranger to app adoption. They do an excellent job. They always have. You can see here in the left side of your screen, March 2nd, the highest spike we saw in any QSR app adoption in several years that we've been running these reports was McDonald's on March 2nd. The reason why they had such a high engagement rate that day is they had a campaign, which was you have to download the app to get a free Egg McMuffin. It was National Egg McMuffin Day. So that's to show you how a well-executed strategy and a media plan resulted in success from a consumer adoption standpoint. But on the other side of it, you see Burger King. Burger King historically did not have high app install trends, okay? In fact, there just didn't seem to be, from our perspective, much of an emphasis on the mobile consumer, mobile eater going into the pandemic. But we found that, and we'll have one other example here in a minute, we found there were kind of maybe two types of brands. Those that took more of a wait and see approach to understand how consumers were going to adapt, maybe even just uncertainty around how long we were going to be, in the pandemic. And then there were brands that took a different look and said they saw that the landscape was changing and they wanted to be proactive and do something about it and do something about it quickly. One of those brands is Burger King. So Burger King, again, historically was not focusing all that much, from what we could tell, on app adoption, ordering online, ordering through app, and doing curbside or drive-through, call ahead or app ahead ordering. But you'll see here, mid-late March and early April, Burger King, for the first time in, I have to believe, the history of their brand, was beating McDonald's on average daily app installs. Okay, and that's really saying something. That just shows that when a brand has a strategy and they invest in that strategy and they're focused on that, they can really start to have an impact on consumer adoption. You'll see a couple other points here where Sonic had a couple promotions that also resulted in a few spikes, but McDonald's has resumed the #1 spot. Burger King has dropped down back to #2, but a solid #2. Again, two different sides. One brand, some brands that maybe took a wait and see approach, and Burger King, on the other hand, much more proactive approach to trying to adapt and meet consumers' needs at their speed. So again, that's just a look at maybe how people were shopping for groceries, how people were eating, a couple of examples of what we experienced and what we saw from a consumer perspective. And then let's shift to maybe what we observed as to how they were shopping for maybe just retail or general household goods. Again, this was another round of research that we had in place, this one from May of last year. We asked consumers, your spending habits, your levels, Are they changing? If they're changing, how are they changing and to what degree? 83%, probably not surprisingly, decreased their spending in May of last year. Okay, there was a lot of uncertainty about jobs, uncertainty about your ability to, a lot of people paying their mortgage, paying their rent. And so with uncertainty, people tend to tighten their spending down. But what we found even maybe more interesting, or maybe not interesting, based off that Market Insider report from eMarketer, that yes, spending as a whole reduced, but it also shifted. Those that were spending, half of them said they were shopping more frequently online. So reduction in spending, but certainly a shift. And then this will lead us into one of the other questions in a moment around how much of that should be sticking, or do we expect to stick going forward? I said earlier I wanted to call out a couple of brands that we saw maybe be a little more proactive during the pandemic and adapt to consumer needs. Best Buy is another one of those examples, similar to what we saw with Burger King, in which Best Buy, they've been around for quite a while, and they're very customer-centric to begin with, but they seem to have taken more of a customer-centric model that solved for any and every needs, right? You're Best Buy, you have to, you're in a very competitive space. We found that some of the initiatives that they launched during the pandemic from a retail perspective were very interesting. All along, for quite some time, they've had the ability for their consumers to shop online, right? And home delivery. So you're competing with Amazon, they deliver to home, Best Buy delivers to home, nothing new there. They also, of course, be at Best Buy, you could pick up in store, you could shop in store when stores were open. Best Buy allowed for buy online, pick up in store. Started doing some more curbside options. And then probably most interesting is their warehouse pickup option that came, towards, I think, probably a few months into the pandemic. And why we find that interesting again is that consumer-centric model is interesting because those that are shopping on Amazon, you see Amazon start to adapt a little bit. They were trying to say, get it in a day, get some things in 2 days, how quickly consumers may want a particular good. Well, for Best Buy, they realized people want to receive products at their speed. And in some cases, they may not want to wait for a product to be shipped to their house, and they may want to save some time that it takes it to go from the warehouse to the store. So if you're close enough and it's convenient for you and the best way in which you want to receive your product, Best Buy will say, order online and drive down to the warehouse and pick it up. So once again, we just wanted to call them out as an example because we feel as though they took a very interesting approach to solving consumers' needs during the pandemic. That's from our view. So we just see how brands and consumers respond. I'm going to ask Justin, because he's in this space and lives in this space. If you were, Justin, did you witness any sort of trends or revenue or successes maybe from the Best Buy as a corp since you were tied into that side of the business?
Yeah, so what's interesting from the Best Buy example is we've seen a lot of the brick and mortar, especially the larger store formats, go to an omni-channel approach. And so, Jeremy, what you outlined paid dividends, right, in terms of their performance numbers from their most recent earnings. And so it's interesting. We'll use Best Buy as the example, but it is something that we're looking at across retail holistically as we really see shoppers go back into stores. They saw same-day delivery for customers increase year over year by 90%. That's an astronomical number. I think the bigger number, that we saw from Best Buy's earnings and something that we're seeing with Target and we're seeing with Walmart and some of these other formats in the grocery space is, Best Buy reported that 60% of all revenue touched an in-store pickup, whether that was in-store or curbside. And so that's something we will continue to monitor as we go into really the conversation with Jackie in the back half of the webinar is how do you market and change your messaging strategy and your audience's strategy now that we're seeing this adoption not only from consumers of using different fulfillment methods, but the retailers are investing in that. And so that's something that we'll continue to monitor, again, as we go throughout the back half of the year. And then I guess, the last theme that I'll call out from the Best Buy and earnings report, but is really indicative of where brick and mortar retail is going is they are experimenting with different store formats. So they are experimenting with square footage as small as 5,000 square feet all the way up to 35,000 square feet. And so that will be indicative of the environment, whether that's an urban and a dense environment versus suburban or rural. But it shows you that the retailers are getting smarter. And I think the key to all this is making it frictionless for the consumer, and that really starts with being able to allow them to choose how they want to pick a product and pick it up. And often that's on their devices, as Jeremy's talked about.
Thanks, Justin. So it sounds like a success for sure on the Best Buy side. I think I saw an article that they're going to start carrying, I think, grills and patio furniture. And again, just thinking through how they are adapting to consumer demand at an incredible speed. Thanks for sharing that, Justin. Closing the book on retail, let's switch now to entertainment briefly. Again, we talked about observing how consumers change their entertainment. Again, probably no surprise to anyone here. Video streaming, gaming saw incredible increases throughout the pandemic, up across the board. I'll hit a couple of these, though, were up even more than other groups. For example, 54% of 18 to 25-year-olds were streaming more, and 56% of those 18 to 25-year-olds were also playing more games. So these numbers were, again, up across the board as people look to find different forms of entertainment with theaters closed and live sporting events canceled and concerts closed. Again, back to that eMarketer stat, people turn to their mobile devices. I won't go too deep into this slide. I know you guys can check this after the webinar. Netflix, main story here is Netflix had a significant market saturation prior to the pandemic. And regardless of all of that, they still saw incredible growth. And so I have a hard time believing there are that many people out there that weren't, maybe they were aware of it, didn't think that they needed Netflix. During the pandemic, they gravitated back, and Netflix was the real big success story. In addition to, Disney Plus did well, Hulu did great. Amazon Prime started to see some real big uptick towards the second half of May. The only one that didn't fare so well, Quibi, again, most of you on this call probably are familiar with their story. Their platform was targeting mostly, small, commuters with like small shortened movie clips. Obviously, commuter traffic was much slower throughout the pandemic. So that's a look back. That's how consumers' behaviors changed. I'm going to quickly talk about maybe where we believe they're headed. Again, so not observed signals, sticking to the market research because we don't have observed signals of things that haven't happened yet. So we deployed Pulse most recently in May of this year and asked consumers, okay, over the next 6 to 9 months, how do you plan on shopping in store, and also how are you shopping in store today? As of May, that survey, that research, 74% are already shopping back in stores. So, near 3 in 4 people, as soon as retailers open back up, people are shopping back in stores. Interesting here, 52% of those actually expect to maintain that level. So at least half of the people are going to stay at the level they're at today from an in-store, shopping frequency, again, from that Pulse study. Next, we asked them their online shopping behavior. So how are you looking at digital? 49% of those consumers, are already using platforms to make purchases. Similarly, 52% have said that they intend to remain the same over the next 6 months, and 23% of those respondents expect their shopping to increase. So combining those together, 75% of consumers are saying they're either going to maintain or increase their online shopping behavior in the next 6 to 9 months. And being Amazon Prime launching today, that number may be even higher. Last stat I'm going to share with you and hand it back to Justin, because this is very close to us and what we do in Mobi. We ask people about retail apps and how often they're using, or how frequently and if they are. And 38% of those surveyed are likely to use retail mobile apps in coming months for their shopping behavior. So thank you for giving me the floor for a few minutes, Justin here and team, to share some of the insights we've seen, and hopefully it can help to inform some strategies and maybe some media executions for our partners out there.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, so quickly, what we wanted to do is just go through some trends that we're starting to see outside of the Mobi research that our team has done over the last really several quarters. So just as we look at the next 6 to 9 months, the Census Bureau last week came out with their May sales report. While there was a total, at an aggregate level, a contraction of about 0.3% from a month-to-month basis, so April to May, we're still seeing enormous jumps, right, in terms of year-over-year data. And so that's something that we're continuing to monitor. It's very clear that we're in a transformational and kind of transition period as we're coming out of the pandemic and where the economy will kind of settle in and where consumer behavior will settle in. But we're starting to see really healthy numbers, right? Retail and food services are up almost 30%, with 28% overall for May. The category, if you look at it from a 90-day rolling basis, is up 36% year over year. So we're seeing, the retail and food services sector start to bounce back. That includes restaurants. And then other categories, clothing and accessories, are up 200%. So as we look to start to go back to offices, I think this is probably the first time in a couple of months I've had to wear a button-down shirt. People are making sure that they have, the appropriate clothing for not only going back into the workplace, but also vacations and things as that's coming about again going into the summer. And then lastly, food and beverage services are up 70% year over year. So we're seeing, again, this large rebound year over year. And it's something that we're continuing to monitor and discuss with our clients at InMobi just to see what the health of the economy is looking like in the US. And then if you look at consumer sentiment, you look at some data that ShopKick pushed out the last couple of weeks. Inflation is a topical point of interest for not only the economy but also for consumers. So 86% of consumers have outlined that they are looking at prices increasing across different goods, whether that is your grocery bill, it's your gas, it's going out to restaurants or clothing. And so what does that mean as we start to get into holiday will be interesting for retailers. We are starting Prime Day today. So this is the litmus test for retailers to understand where consumer consumption will go and what types of categories will they look to buy in. That's a non-essential category outside of just their typical staples from a week-to-week perspective. And then lastly, from a advertiser view, Magna came out with their annual report this month as well. No surprise, advertisers are flocking back to spending and getting back in front of consumers. As Jeremy articulated, media consumption for the average U.S. adult is up year over year, 31 minutes or 32 minutes on mobile. So not only is the economy opening back up, but there's more consumption taking place as well from a digital format. So we're seeing that in the investment numbers and the projections that are expected for the industry and across not only just the retail category, but multiple categories. And then with that, I will move to our fireside chat with Jackie. Jackie, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Justin. Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, of course. Well, first of all, we want to thank you for joining us today. And I know we're a little late on time, so we'll jump right into it. So Jeremy, at the beginning in our research section, said, there are pretty much two buckets of clients, right? Those who waited to see what happens and those who were proactive in his Burger King example. How did you and your team at Dentsu and your clients handle reacting to the pandemic, and especially at the beginning with so much uncertainty going on?
Yeah, I would say most of our clients also fell into one of two buckets. Incredibly polarizing. Of those clients that really caught a tailwind with consumer behavior during COVID, and then those who were simply fighting for survival. So in an ad agency, we often have clients come to us and say, we're second, but we want to be first, or like, hey, we're doing good, but we could do better. And so we had to react and align to that need of, in some cases, simply keeping the lights on. And a lot of the ways we did that is identifying a consumer insight strategy, identifying how do we surgically tailor your targeting strategy, your investment decisions to figure out how to either ride that great momentum or help them squeeze every last dollar out of their marketing budgets. I would say separately too, there was a major shift in a laser focus on in-the-moment signals. So instead of putting a lot of money and advertising effort around big executions or something that was more evergreen, it was adoption of what kinds of search data, location data, hand-raising programmatic signals that they could leverage to make smart decisions, because our reality and consumer behavior was was changing on a day-to-day basis. The one thing I wish I would have seen my clients adopt, we did see several who were front runners, but many of them were a little bit delayed in reassessing their audiences. And when you're thinking about how do you keep the doors open or make money in a crisis, a lot of it is how do you really connect with your consumers and change their behavior? Yeah. So as dentsu, we recommended an immediate reassessment of audiences to brush off the segmentation and to try to figure out how do we want to have one-to-one conversations with the consumers who are listening and ready to spend.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, right, a lot of marketers use personas for their brands, and it's based off of historical data and lots of research and several months that go into it. And then we get to a Black Swan event and you just throw out the entire playbook. So, you in prep for the webinar, you use this phrase, extreme adoption.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Like, as you went through this process, right, of helping guide your clients and the audience strategies, I imagine messaging is a big component of that. Like, how were you able to help them adjust? Because not all advertisers are as agile as they need to be, let alone, want to be.
Yeah. I'm very spoiled being at dentsu because we sit on a platform that allows us to talk one-to-one with consumers. Our data is over 30 different sources and refreshed every 30 days. So we do have that fresh data available for analysis and for activation. But what was extreme adoption is our clients now blowing the doors off of getting in there. Of course, there's always hurdles when it comes to leveraging data, but now they realize the extreme importance of it and moved all of their money and their focus into utilizing the data that was available. Several of our clients, 7-Eleven and Kroger, for example, were really forward-thinking in how do I sub-segment my audiences to figure out where these hand-raising signals are. So we created sub-personas, or think about it as double-clicking into the segments that they had, utilizing this real-time psychographic data of, okay, these people are probably going to hang out in a lazy boy for the next 6 months, or like these people are going to be like peering into the dark windows of a bar. And so we were able to sort of create completely different strategies and creative and targeting based on that. So it was extreme adoption in those conversations that were taking a really long time to address and to leverage those signals suddenly were accelerated. And secondly, consumers or our clients really interested in thinking about consumer targeting and audience strategy in a new way and willing to test into it immediately.
Yeah, and as an agency professional, that's exactly what you want, right? Is to be able to test and guide your clients to look at new audiences and help them discover that. And it's interesting because I think in the retail space, we've all seen the chart of e-commerce growth of 5 years and 5 weeks that happened last spring, and you're getting just across all demographic bands, new people coming online to buy goods and find services. How did you work with your clients so you had these signals and you're kind of changing in this extreme adoption. How did it work out? Like, how did you then put that in market? So you do the analysis and you observe what's going on and you create these subsegments. How did that go from an execution perspective? Where did you go in terms of addressability and all those fun questions?
Yeah. I mean, well, the easy answer is I'm also very spoiled rotten that this system does allow for addressable audiences and targeting too. So we could take those subsegments and push them out. For example, in the case of 7-Eleven, those who are likely to stay home, we served them a delivery message. And those who are more likely to be stopping in store, we would send them a $1 coffee with contactless checkout. So, there are ways to connect the dots. But more importantly, for those of you who have different types of activation technology stacks, I think it's also boiling down to who is the core of the consumer that you're interested in reaching, and then working with your media partners to recreate that persona through their behavioral targeting signals. So not everything has to be done through one system. You can also talk to your partners to figure out, this is the right type of human I want to reach with the message I know is going to resonate. How do we go and recreate that in your platform and through the screen that we know that they're using?
Yeah, it's very interesting. And now we're starting to come out of the pandemic, knock on wood. And, we're seeing there are tons of trends that accelerated over the last year. And as you've discussed, right, you've changed the playbook and the way that you go to market with a lot of your clients from an audience's perspective. How are you helping your clients plan for the normalization that's coming back, and what was a pre-pandemic norm or maybe a post-pandemic norm that's staying around?
Yeah. Tactically speaking, we are merging data sources together that really signal consumer behavior. So spend data, mobile location data, content consumption, and search. And the common key for all of those really can be DNA. We're not at the reality yet where we can get down to consumer level or device level, especially when it comes to search, but we can start looking at these in very micro DNA markets. And so we're able to intake those massive amounts of data sets, fuse them together, and then think forward and predict. So tactically speaking, we can get an idea based on category, how consumers will be able to kind of reintegrate and then advise our clients based on that. Separately, I have to make a plug for custom research solutions. Coming from an analytics background, I always thought surveys were a little bit basic, but now the technology on hand of even these self-service platforms, they're like spaceships, guys. These things are great. They're easy to use. They're fast. A lot of them own their own panels. So don't be afraid to go out and just ask your consumer base, because the recruitment and the amount of richness of consumer intelligence that you can get out of there is really worth it, and it's not that expensive. We are actually even building our own panel at dentsu of diverse consumers, because we know that they were hit the hardest during COVID. So let's figure out what they need and how they're moving, and we can create marketing strategies based on that. The last thing I will say, which I love that this came up a little bit earlier as we were preparing to get on the webinar today, is I think as marketers too, the humanity of consumers and just being really authentic and embracing imperfection, I think that is a trend that will continue regardless of the spots and dots and data and research. Is as we continue, I think that the more humane we can get with our messaging, the more authentic that we can get with targeting and with talking to our consumers, that's something that will go a long way regardless of what the KPIs look like.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I know it was a topic that we had in some of our chats before the webinar, but I will make a selfish plug as well for us in terms of the survey tool. So, it's an interesting and very unique capability, right, to go and survey your consumers. And so it's something that, we do at InMobi as well with our Pulse tool, which Jeremy walked us through some of the research before. It's critical, right? And that's something that we're discussing with a lot of our clients as well, is you just have preconceived notions of what certain target audiences and consumers want that are going away. Everyone's had 15 months to reassess their life and what they want and where they want to invest their money, whether it's in your home or it's traveling or it being a digital nomad, whatever it may be. So the fastest way to do that as a marketer is to go and just do dip tests. Go survey your consumers and ask them what they're looking for. So I couldn't agree more. And it's exciting that you guys have a tool as well internally and some of the other partners that are coming into the space. So I know we want to go back to Q&A, just keeping an eye on time here. But while Stuart and the gang comes back on screen, I totally agree with you in terms of just empathy and humanity coming into a marketer's consideration in terms of what stays around. And I think we'll see that in a lot of the creative and the messaging over the next several months.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, we're certainly seeing it in the news. Anybody who's seen the Dear Intern HBO news that's been passing around, I think we're now starting to see people no longer strive for perfection. And I think that's a great in for marketers and messaging to be a true partner.
Yep, couldn't agree more.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone. Great information. Really appreciate this research. We do want to move in to some audience questions. And as I'm doing that, I'm just going to return to slides here just because there is some ways to contact InMobi. I can have that up as I'm just going through a couple of quick reminders here. We're going to get to audience questions in just a second. We'll go through a good lightning round, see if we can get as many as we can here. So I do just want to remind you, if you have a question for our speakers, and I'm watching them come in fast and furious right now, just submit it using the question tool that you see there on your screen. Again, we're going to go about 10, 12 minutes here. We'll get to as many as we possibly can. If we don't get to your question, I always make sure they get forwarded over to our sponsor, so there's an opportunity for an offline response. A couple quick reminders here. If you do want a copy of today's slides, and boy, great stats and really interesting insights as that came through, you can get a PDF of the deck right now in the event resources area. You should see that tab by where you see the question tool underneath the video window right now. Also, our webinar has been recorded, will be available on demand. We're going to send you a link to that on-demand version about 3:30 Eastern time today. Check that out. Check out your email for that. Grab the link. Send it off to your colleagues if you think they'd be interested in learning some of this, or better yet, have them register. We'll send them that link directly. All right, let's get into some of the questions that we've got here. And I want to start out, and Jackie, I'm going to address this one to you, but certainly, Justin, feel free to hop in. We're talking about, right, we're just hitting the end of the first half of 2021. Second half of 2021 is coming up. A couple really huge shopping seasons, right? We've got back to school. Maybe back to school's already over for all I know. But, you know, it always seems to be occurring, not when anyone is actually thinking about school. But then we've got the holidays. Everyone's doing their holiday planning, or you should be doing your holiday planning or locking that down right now. What should we look at in sort of that second half of the year? What should people be considered? What do you think is going to be happening with holiday 2021?
Research says it's going to be a huge holiday. I think PwC came out with something. It's all over the news that 52+% of consumers want to make up for last year, and specifically not only make up for it, but indulgence. So this is another huge consumer trend: is how do I indulge myself because I deserve it, and how do I indulge the people who I haven't seen in a while? However, I do think that regardless of the interest in buying, that consumers will avoid chaotic experiences now more than ever, and will be more willing to pay up for convenience. So as Jeremy and Justin said earlier, avoiding a friction experience. Like we're all looking for pleasant experiences now. And so even though we're all expecting consumers to buy more in holiday, I do think it will be through a lens of convenience.
Anything, Justin and Jeremy, that the research is backing up or that you're seeing in some of your tracking?
I wouldn't say from a research perspective that I have on hand, at least, but I think, what we're seeing is, it will be really interesting to watch how the retailers and some of the consumer brands address opening back up, right? You have the Olympics at the end of the summer. It's a big advertising period. A lot of creative dollars go into that period. So, I think a good example is Peloton and what they've actually done over the last few months in their recent branding campaign, just showing the bike throughout a messy apartment with somebody on a Zoom call and somebody, teaching the kids while they're getting in their bike ride. We're a big Peloton culture here at InMobi. And so, that's something that's true, right? It's something that happens. We have folks on our teams who sit on a video conference while they're getting in their slow burn. So, that's something where I think it's interesting to see how brands get creative, because that's, when you talk about branding, purely from a branding perspective and an equity play, those are the creatives that consumers remember.
Mm-hmm. Justin, a question came in as we're looking at this, talking about those businesses that really have much more of, who are more centered around in-store sales. They've sort of made it through these past 12 months, but now they're sort of expecting that. So any advice or what do you sort of see for those? Do they need to start to add in more of this sort of buy online, pick up in store? Do they need to focus more on the in-store experience, right? I mean, maybe it's not quite as much as sort of going through. And I'll start with you, Justin. Maybe you're not the person for this. Feel free to deflect to someone else.
Sure. No, I'm happy to start with this one. It's interesting, right? Like, we are seeing the big bots and mass merchant formats win in the pandemic, right? And so your Walmarts, your Targets, your Best Buys, they've all done very well because they were already investing in their e-commerce experience, but they very quickly moved to how do they make an omni-channel experience from an in-store perspective. And what Jeremy talked about at the beginning of the webinar with Best Buy specifically is the buy online, pick up in store. One, that's here to stay. I'm personally very happy about that. I use it all the time. And it's a great trend, right? And it's just a great experience because you can get something same day versus having to wait and having boxes to go through and all that fun stuff. But I think the other piece of the question is, how do you address that from a marketing perspective? I think it's going to be something to watch with the retailers. So as retailers look at testing different formats, you're also hearing a lot of the apparel retailers talk about they're just buying fewer products. They're buying a smaller assortment. So that way they can make sure that they are keeping operational costs low, and given supply constraints, that's also influencing it. But it's going to be, a space where you're going to see different categories within retail. Look at experimenting with things like, again, shrinking their assortment mix or bringing in new types of categories like, someone like Kroger's expanding outside of grocery. You saw Target work with Ulta and bringing in beauty into their stores. So whatever can keep people in the store, in addition to giving them a different way to pick up their products, is something that retailers should be looking at, and a lot of the good guys already are and investing pretty quickly and bigly.
Mm-hmm. Jackie, can I show? As much as I want to hear you, there's one I want to ask you about here, because as we're going through here, and that is this idea of evolving personas. You referred to this one, right? Because you talked about, again, the micro personas that you brought up, which I think are a fantastic way of approaching this, right? It's not just sort of our large groups, but it's I like the idea of the person peering in the window of a darkened bar.
That may have been me.
Hey, I'm no accusations. But my question is, how do you start to understand these new personas, right? You've got everyone who sort of built a world of personas that are not there anymore. How do you start to come up with these, and where do you go in sort of emerging persona world?
Yeah, I have a very strong opinion about this. All of you marketers should redo your segmentation now. Because we went through a major world event. Let's do a one-time reassessment. And do not put people in boxes of demographics and geographics. It does not matter if people live in the same DMA and have the same skin color. you should be clustering and categorizing your audiences based on psychographics. How do they make decisions? How do they prioritize things in their life? So then we create these evergreen personas of your audiences post-COVID. Those stay the same. People can move in and out of them, and they probably will be nuanced. Behaviors might tweak a lot, but really who you are as a person is not going to alter that much over the course of the next couple of years. So my recommendation, do the hard work now, create the chassis, and then kind of let the data filter and allow those people to tweak and change over the next couple of years before you invest any more money into personas.
You're right. You are quite opinionated on this one. Justin and Jeremy, maybe not quite as opinionated. Anything to add?
Yeah, I'll say, echo Jackie's sentiments here. I'd say it does start with data, fresh data, okay? Deep and fresh data. That's where it all starts, is you have to have as much quality data as fresh as possible to inform all of those different psychographics. And then, yes, absolutely, trim that down, segment, sub-segment, do it at scale, right? Because marketers have to have scale, but agree with where she's headed.
Justin, anything, or you just want to nod along?
I'll let Jeremy cover it for us.
Perfect. Listen, I'd like to continue this. We have a whole bunch of questions we didn't have a chance to get to. Unfortunately, it's fast approaching the top of the hour here. So I do want to thank you again. Great presentation, really great insights. Thank you, InMobi, for sharing those. Jackie, thanks for sharing your candid opinions on all of this in your conversation with Justin. Really enlightening. And thanks to the three of you for taking some time here to take at least a few questions from the audience. Just final reminders to our audience. Again, we didn't have a chance to get to your question. I'm going to forward them over to our sponsors at InMobi. You want the slides, you're going to find them in event resources. You're going to check your email at 3:30 today. You're going to find the link to the on-demand version, and you're going to send that out to your client, to all your colleagues, so that they can catch some of this great intelligence. So keep an eye out for that. Lastly, adweek.com/webinars. See what we've got coming up. Sign up for an upcoming webinar. Check out the archive of on-demand. Lots of great topics. Again, thanks to our speakers and our sponsors from InMobi. Thanks to our audience for taking time out of your increasingly busy and hectic days. And we look forward to seeing everyone at an upcoming Adweek webinar. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.